So I've been trying to write a script for this, but I can't seem to wrap my words around the word file. So I'm just going to throw that out, and I'm going to speak from the heart. I feel as though RPGs, adventure games, role-playing games, things with big worlds, and the type of thing where you want to have a lot of content, a lot of missable content, because not everybody's going to want to be exploring everything. But you want to have an open world with a lot of characters, a lot of different stores, different categories of characters that you can play. You can play a mage, a rogue, a warrior, cleric, priest, whatever, right? You can play all sorts of different things. I feel like as time goes on, developers, especially AAA developers, are more and more afraid to actually make good RPGs. And when I say a good RPG, I mean something along the lines of, say, Dragon Age is a very modernized take of the RPGs that I'm talking about. But for example, something like Fallout, the original one, and Fallout 2, which had a lot of missable content, right? You can finish the entire game and miss like half the map. Like in Fallout 2, you start over here in the map, you go like this, then you down and this, and then you go up here, and then you finish the game. All of this you missed. You missed like 60% of the map by doing that, right? And this includes like actual full-on cities with their own quests, like completely missed because they're completely optional. You don't have to go there. Not a single mission brings you there except for like I think there's a delivery that you can make from one city to the next, and that's how you get introduced to that area. But like nothing forces you to stop there, right? You can go from point A to B to C to D, and you're done. And in Fallout 1, it was kind of same. There was less content. It was much more straight line, but still, there was missable content. You could play completely through the game and completely miss entire sections of the game. And the same kind of happens with Oblivion, for example. Though, in my opinion, Oblivion kind of messed things up in certain regards because it gives you fast travel to all the major cities in the game, so you kind of just don't even need to explore, which kind of lends itself a lot to this point, right? Where because you don't need to explore, a lot of people just don't. I know a lot of people who just finished Oblivion in 2-3 hours, did no side quests whatsoever, got to the end of the game and were like, yeah, that was a fun story, and they just put it away. And then I know other people who like spent close to 100 hours in the game and never finished it because they're just doing other stuff, right? And then they start downloading mods, and then the game is so much bigger for them. And I've been playing Arcanum on stream, and Arcanum has this interesting system, which is all about magic versus technology. And if you do a lot of magic, technology just doesn't work as well for you. And if you do a lot of technology, magic just doesn't work for you, period, right? So if you want to be the type of guy who goes around wearing a full suit of plate armor with a gun and a shield, and you're just fucking blasting everybody's heads off with a gat, magic just doesn't work on you. You have your friend who tries to cast a healing spell on you, and it just fizzles. It doesn't work, right? And it feels very, very telling that a lot of the mechanics in this game of Arcanum, it's very much about this doesn't work here because it doesn't make sense. You have to take this stuff and put it over here. And this goes all the way down to shopkeepers, for example. If you have a weapon and you want to sell it, who do you sell to? You go to the weapon shop, right? Wrong. You have to look at your weapon. What type of weapon is it? Is it a technologically based weapon? Is it the type of weapon that is very technologically produced, or is it a magical weapon? Because that's two different shops. And if it's neither shop is going to want it. So you have to take it to the junk dealer. And the junk dealer will buy it for a lower price. or you take it to a lower level smithy who will just take whatever, right? And so there's a lot of this stuff in the game, and I feel like a lot of RPGs nowadays kind of lack a well-defined sense of the idea that they are trying to create a world, a setting. Look at Veilguard, for example. It's very clear that there was no real concern with creating a living, breathing world. They wanted to create these stages for you, right? And so they create the stages. You have Treviso, you have Minrathous, you have all of these cities, right? Really, Minrathous and Treviso are the two main cities that you're going to be visiting. Everything else is just like an arena that you're visiting for a bit, or just a little headquarters, or just a small like town, but it's not lived, right? You show up at the merchant, you talk to the merchant, and he has just a small selection of items that really don't feel like the type of thing that a real person would be selling, or a real person would be interested in buying, right? Other older games, for example, I still remember older games where healing was done not just through magical potions, through food. Like in Skyrim, for example, you see all of these little stores throughout. For example, when you get to Whiterun, and there's all sorts of stores. You've got the smithy right there, and then you've got the leather shop, or the hunting goods store, which has leather armor and bows and all that stuff. And then you get to the market, and there's a place where they're selling jewelry, and a place where they're selling fruit, a place where they're selling meat, and none of these are real shops that you can interact with. And so, in my opinion, I feel like the games nowadays, RPGs nowadays, suffer a lot from their lack of wanting to have those stores be in the game. It would not have been a bad thing to say, if you want to go buy fruit, you do it at this merchant. You don't go into the tavern and then buy it from the tavern. No, you go to the market, where there's fruit, where there's meat, where there's all of this stuff here for the people of the town to buy. And if you want to buy weapons, you go to the smithy. And if you want to buy hunting goods, you go to the hunting goods store, or the general store, or whatever, right? You have this separation, and it adds a sense of actual reality to the world. Because, in real life, for example, and I understand it's a game, not everything should be super realistic, right? But there is a sense of realism that is expected. Because, if no sense of realism was expected, you'd take a sword, you'd swing it at something, you'd miss completely, and it would still drop dead, right? A sense of realism is required for people to be able to care. And as much realism as you can add without damaging the experience of the game is a good thing. Baldur's Gate did this wonderfully, right? It had stores for everything, and everybody in the game, every single person in these stores, would actually begin to like you more if you worked with them well, or if they liked you, they would give you better prices as well. And each person would have a different stock. You could go to the tavern and buy food there, or you could go to the actual food store. There were like markets where you could buy fruit and food. And then you'd go to the smithy and buy weapons, and go to the magic shop and buy magic items, and go to the spell store or the library and you'd buy spell scrolls. And so you had this, and Baldur's Gate was made better for it. But it feels as though more and more RPGs nowadays don't want to do that. And I feel like it's part of this distancing that has occurred over the last, I want to say 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, for people who have been in this longer than me. Because 20 years, I was 5. 20 years ago, I was 5 years old, right? 15 years ago, I was 10. I was already playing video games at the time, but I was 10. I couldn't really realize a lot of these things, but I play a lot of older games because I want. My God, my fucking hair is crazy. It's just like standing up on it. I play a lot of these older games, and one thing I like about them is the fact that they add an extra level of complexity to things that make it so you feel as though what you do matters. One thing that Arcanum also has is the fact that if you wear nice clothes, people like you more, and so they give you better prices because they think, oh, he's well dressed, so that I'm gonna be nicer to him. And at the same time, if you wear bad clothes, they like you less. So it is incentivized to, when you get to a city, you change clothes. You change out of your armor and put on a suit. You put on a suit to go into the town, to talk to people, to buy items, to look presentable, so that when you are buying and selling, people will like you more and, actually, trust you with information and give you better prices, believing that, you're a nicer person or you're a more respectable citizen. And at the same time, it feels like a lot of developers nowadays are afraid to do that. And it's a shame. Because I genuinely believe that people would appreciate that a lot. People would appreciate that sort of detail, that level of added spice to the world. And as much as you see people on Twitter or on social media complaining about when there's like a scene in a video game that really triggers them, I genuinely don't believe that that is the type of thing that anybody actually cares about or even dislikes. Because everybody I talked to that played an orc in Baldur's Gate 3, you want to know something that they were disappointed with? The fact that no one acknowledges that orcs are an incredibly violent race in the Forgotten Realms setting. You're walking around town as a half-orc, and you walk up to a store, and people just go, "Oh, hey, man," and it takes away from the fantasy. At the same time, you'd play a Dragonborn, which is an incredibly rare race, even if it's considered a standard race in the setting of Forgotten Realms, and there's no acknowledgement of the fact that you are a rarity. Even if it's a standard race, it's not an exotic race like, say, Drow. Drow are considered an exotic race because they are very rare in the surface. But that is acknowledged by the game. The game acknowledges if you're a Drow. The game acknowledges if you're a Tiefling. But it doesn't acknowledge half-orcs. It doesn't acknowledge Dragonborn. And I feel like you miss out on that. And this isn't a case of this isn't a case of the devs of Baldur's Gate 3 being afraid of it. It's a case of them not having the funding and the time to add so much into the game. They couldn't, right? They had to choose what they were adding, because it's important to remember that Larian was a very small studio before the massive success of Baldur's Gate 3. And in fact, Baldur's Gate 3 only had the scope that it had thanks to the success of its early access program. Because prior to that, the game was going to go up to level 5. That's it. That's what we were going to get. We were going to get level 5. And then it was going to end. And because of the success of the early access, they started to think, hey, do we go to level 20? And they decided to stay at level 12. They stayed in the middle because they felt like that would add more to the story. It would let you get more out of the fantasy than if they had gone all the way to level 20. And a lot of people do believe that the third act of Baldur's Gate 3 drags on a bit, so it's actually a good thing that they did that. But Baldur's Gate 3 is a rarity nowadays. Baldur's Gate 3 is the exception. There's a reason Baldur's Gate 3 is a 10 out of 10 game. Because honestly, if it had come out 20 years ago, with the same expansiveness, the same scope, the same quality, it would have probably been an 8 out of 10, because it would have been surrounded by giants of the same height. And it wouldn't have fallen short of any of them. It would have been just as good as them, maybe better than a lot of them, but it would not have risen so high because it wouldn't have stood alone amongst dwarfed creations of, honestly, uncreative minds. And a lot of RPGs nowadays seem like they are very much uncreative and afraid to be creative. You look at a lot of the stories of, for example, Dragon Age. I mentioned Veilguard earlier, right? In Dragon Age, one of the first things that is established by everybody in Dragon Age, elves do not talk back to humans or elves get smacked. That's it. And so when you get out of a city and you encounter Dalish elves, they are extremely intolerant of humans. They don't like humans. For good reason, right? Like, there were a bunch of wars between humans and elves, which the elves started. And the elves lost all of them. Of course they're going to be salty, right? As the story of Dragon Age developed, Dragon Age 2 comes around. The exact same vibe, right? Elves live in their own little ghetto, the alienage, because they're alienated. And they're seen as second-class, if not third-class citizens. They suffer a lot, there's a lot of inequality, and part of the RPG experience is deciding whether or not your character cares. Whether or not your character feels anything for the elves. And you can't. Like, every time I played, I always played a character who actually wanted to help the elves, who actually gave a shit about them, who actually worked to help. And, of course, the Dalish elves, being bitter as fuck for losing every single war, they don't like you because you're human. Or not. Or you're just... If you're not a Dalish, they dislike you, on principle. You know? And by the time of Inquisition, Dragon Age has kind of started to lose its teeth, to some extent. The Dalish are much more compromising with you. They're much more polite, even if you're a human, even if you're just the exact type of person that they would hate. You know, a human who's a noble, who is in power, who has all of these things. They should absolutely hate you, and they really don't. And it kind of does take away from the story, especially as you find out more about how the Dalish ended up in the situation they are. It's revealed that, yes, all of the wars between elves and humans that led to them being in that position were actually started by elves. Obviously. Humans can't stop winning. It's just what we do. But by the time of Veilguard, and this was actually something that my girlfriend, who is currently playing the game, realized out of nowhere. There's a lot of mentions of slavery in Veilguard, especially when you're doing the Shadow Dragon questline in Minrathous. They mention that one of the things that they are there to stop is slavery. There is not a single slave in the game. Not one. You go to Minrathous, the capital of Tevinter, Tevinter being the only place in Thedas where slavery is legal. And there's a lot of slavery in Tevinter because most of the people there own slaves because it's part of their culture. It's a thing that they do. The same way we would go to a store and buy, tools for the shed, they buy an elf to go take care of their shed, right? There's not a single one in the entire game. At least none that I saw, and none that she saw. And that's a bad thing. Because you're taking away from the story that has been written by better writers than you. And they are better writers than you because they had the balls to write a story that they wanted to write. And now you're standing here on their shoulders, taking that story, and I do say you are standing here on their shoulders because most of the writers of Veilguard did not work on prior Dragon Age games, and in fact, as soon as they finished writing Veilguard, they got fired. So if we do get another Dragon Age game, which we probably won't because Dragon Age Veilguard bombed, the same writers will not be writing the next game. But it becomes very clear that they didn't have the same vision. They didn't have the same love for their craft that the prior creators had. And it's sad. it is sad to see that so many RPGs nowadays just completely lack that passion. They completely lack that love for creation, that wanting to make something. And the problem with this, by the way, like I'm not saying like, oh, we need stories with slavery. We do, but not because slavery's good. We need stories with actual bad things in them, because otherwise good means nothing. One of the major complaints that I have against Veilguard is that no matter what you do, you can't be the bad guy. You can't be an asshole. You cannot look somebody dead in the eye, like Tash, who is one of the most confrontational characters in the game. By far, right? She comes out to you as non-binary, and I don't know. I wouldn't have picked this option personally, even if it was there, but I think an option to not agree with Tasha's view of herself should be present. The option to not play along with not play along, that's the wrong word, to not the option to not refer to Tash as they them should have been present. The same way that there was an option to choose to be trans yourself, right? And the option to have they them pronouns is present. But if one option is present and the other isn't, there's not really a real choice being made, right? If the only option you have is forward, then you're not actually making a choice. You're not actually choosing an option. It's being chosen for you. And I think that is a problem, because it demeans not just the player, but the characters in the story. Because now it means that you cannot have the same conversations with the character and have those conversations mean something. Because now, they're not a conversation. They're a lecture. If you do not have the ability to be bad, you're not being good. You're just being, right? In Dragon Age Origins, you have the option to be a piece of shit from start to finish. You have the option to murder a child because you can't be bothered to do more than that. And then your companions look you dead in the eye and say, hey, look at me. You're a piece of shit. What you did was bad. And you can look them in the eye and say, and what are you going to do about it? And they do, and, you know, some of them will fight you. Some of them will straight up just try to kill you right there on the spot. And that's a rare thing nowadays. In fact, that's a thing that almost doesn't happen nowadays. In Veilguard, like I said, Tash, super confrontational when you meet her, super rude to you, constantly just telling you like, yeah, I don't want you here. I don't know about you guys. We already have a Grey Warden. Grey Wardens hunt dragons all the time. We have a dragon hunter. We don't need her. If it was me, if I was the main character, I would have turned my ass around and left. Let her deal with her shit. If you want to be an asshole, if you don't want to deal with us, if you do not want to even attempt civility when we are being civil to you, more than civil, right? We're trying to understand you. We're asking questions about you. It's like, hey, I notice you've got the ropes that the Qunari wear around their arms. Do you follow the Qun? And there is a, oh, yeah, I do. Or, no, actually, this is just something I wear because, you know, my mom is Qunari and so she wants me to wear them. No, her response is, I can wear what I want. You don't tell me who I am. What is this confrontational shit? What the fuck is your problem? You're this character who is hyper confrontational, and you have no opportunity to confront her about it. You have no opportunity to talk back at her over it. And consistently this happens more and more with RPGs nowadays, where you want to make a decision and that decision isn't present. You cannot make that decision because the decision has been made for you. It's not an RPG. It's a straight road that you're supposed to just walk down that road. And Veilguard is a new game. That's why I brought it up, and it's a very, very big offender when it comes to this. But there's other games like this that have come out over the last few years, which personally I'm not remembering because they were forgettable. But then you compare them to the classics of old, and people still play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. People still play Dragon Age Origins in bigger numbers than other Dragon Age games. And I'm not talking about the multiplayer of Dragon Age Inquisition, which I understand it's still reasonably popular. I mean, I played it a while ago. Like, I would sit in queue for like 5 seconds and find a match, so I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of people playing that game are playing the multiplayer, whereas the vast majority of people playing Origins are playing the story in different ways, right? You play as a mage, then you play as a warrior, then you play as a rogue, then you play as a different warrior, then you play as a different warrior, then you play as a different warrior, then you play as a different rogue, then you play as a different mage, then you play as a different mage, and you can have all of these, and it all feels meaningful. And the same thing in Dragon Age 2. Not so much in Inquisition, but to some extent, yeah, even if like the decisions don't really matter all that much. There really isn't that much of a change in the game. There's like 1 or 2 boss fights which are switched, but the boss fight itself kind of plays the same because all the monsters in Inquisition kind of play the same way. And in Veilguard, I do not know that the game will be different enough on a second playthrough. Like, at the most, there's the major decision where do you abandon Treviso or do you abandon Mithrathos, which is a dumb decision, by the way. At that point in the story, you should not have the means to affect the result of those. But sure, right? We can say that Rook is just built different, okay? But at the end of the day, the problem comes from lack of veracity in the story and in the world, and that lack comes from missable content. Someone said, I don't know who said it first, but I've heard it a couple times in the last few days, and I think the quote is, "The core of a good RPG is missable content." And the more I think about it, the more I'm compelled to agree. Because there just is nothing else to it, right? If your RPG does not have missable content, that means it's not really an RPG. And missable content can be something as simple as, hey, Tash told you she's non-binary and wants to be referred to as they, them. You said, that's fucking dumb, and continue to call her she. So eventually Tash leaves the group. You can no longer finish her quest. You cannot have any of those conversations with her. You cannot have her in the final fight. Missable content, right? It's as simple as that. And hey, you can even have every other character in the game tell you, you're a piece of shit. You're being rude to her for no reason. She was vulnerable to you. She opened up to you expecting you to help her and to be, open with her and to not pile on when she's vulnerable. And you did everything that she needed you not to do. And so she left, right? Perfectly fine, right? I don't think anybody would have had a problem with that. In fact, we've had YouTube compilations of people having the time of their lives just being mean to NPCs. But instead, we don't get it. And the game suffers for it. Now, I get that a lot of games nowadays have this message that they want to put out. The message fails when you're just preaching, because something that every kid knows how to do is to just not pay attention, right? And we don't really forget how to do that. We never really forgot. And the problem with making a $70, 60 euro if you're in Europe, but the problem with making a $70/60 euro lecture which lasts for 50 plus hours is that 2 hours in, people are going to go, haha, no, give me my money back. And they're going to get their money back. and you're gonna be without money, and you're gonna be kind of screwed. Because, like, and keep in mind, we know sales for Dragon Age roughly through, just calculating the math, right? If you just look at peak player numbers and the achievements that have been acquired and all that stuff, you can calculate how many times the game has been sold, just roughly. And most people have landed on about 1 million copies. Considering the game was in development for 10 years. That game was probably just in development, probably upwards of $250 million. Probably. This is what almost every person who has looked at the numbers has landed on, roughly $250 million. So 250 million plus 100 million with the average commercialization for AAA games. It's just standard at this point. It's 100 mil. The game is $70. 20%, if not 30% of that goes to Steam. So you're getting like $50 at the end of the day. So what? You paid off a seventh of what you owe? Yeah, that game bombed. That game is not getting a sequel. That game is not getting DLC. That game is not getting anything. And the problem with that is because it wasn't a game. It was a 50-hour-long lecture that you paid a premium for. And I miss RPGs that just let you be a piece of shit. Because if you can't be the piece of shit, being the hero doesn't mean anything. If in Arcanum, when you start the game, an NPC walks up to you and says, "Oh my god, you survived that thing! Wow, that must mean you're this person!" Because the holy text said that this person would come down from the skies in wings on fire and be the only survivor. And everything points to it happening today, right here, and that means it's you. So you're this really important person. You need to come with me, or if you don't want to come with me, I'll help you do whatever you want to do, because my job now is to follow you everywhere and help you with whatever you want. And you can say, "Nah, man, I'm just gonna kill you and take your shit." And this is a dialogue option that you say, "Nah, I'm just gonna kill you and take your stuff." And then you kill him, you take his stuff. And then you can continue with the game. And eventually, you carry on with the story. And that's just such a thing that makes everything else matter more. The fact that you have that option, the fact that you can say no to the main story, gives weight to the main story. Or maybe I'm just rambling. I've been rambling for like 30 minutes at this point about RPGs. So I'm probably just a crazy old man, 25 years old, you know how it is. But, let me know what you think, right? Let me know if I'm an idiot. Let me know if I'm stupid. Let me know if I'm racist, homophobic, whatever the hell, right? I don't know. Maybe I am. Maybe I just want to be homophobic in video games. Who knows, right? Like, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. Cheers.